Good afternoon, everyone. Something is about to detonate, not in the destructive sense, in the specific, all at once, everything changes simultaneously sense of something that has been under pressure for long enough that when it finally releases, it does not release gradually. It releases completely in one moment with the full force of everything that was building during the compression and what detonates what is about to break open in your life with that quality of sudden, total, nothing is the same after this. Completeness is not destruction, it is news. The specific, huge, this is what the quiet was building toward kind, the kind that arrives not as a single piece of information, but as the visible surfacing of an entire invisible process, months or years of invisible work, finally breaking through the surface all at once and producing, in a single moment, the full evidence of everything that was always being assembled. Take what is yours today. What resonates, let it land without reaching for reasons it cannot be as significant as it feels. What does not, release it gently. But for those of you who felt something activate when I said detonate, who felt the specific alertness of someone who has been waiting for exactly this quality of release, this reading is carrying something today that the quiet was always pointing toward. Let me speak about what huge news actually is in the honest, this is what the phrase contains sense rather than the inflated could mean anything sense. Huge news is not simply good news at a larger scale. It is news that changes the frame. That takes the picture you have been looking at, the specific configuration of your current circumstances, your current understanding of what is possible, your current baseline for what your life contains, and replaces it, not updates it, replaces it with something that makes the previous frame feel not wrong exactly, but simply insufficient for what is now available. Soft sigh. The frame is about to be replaced. That is the specific quality of what is approaching, not a favorable development within the existing structure of your life, but a development that alters the structure itself. That arrives with enough force to change what you understand to be the baseline, what you believe is available, what you have perhaps through the specific recalibration that a difficult season tends to install, stopped expecting, could simply happen like this all at once, clearly, in the form of something that is simply good without the complicated middle ground of almost but not quite that has perhaps been the recent default. Simply good, actually arriving at the full size of what the invisible process was always building toward. Now let me speak about what has been happening in the invisible, because the huge news does not arrive from nowhere, and understanding what produced it changes the quality of how it is received. There has been a process running in the background of your visible life, beneath the surface of the days that have looked ordinary, in the invisible architecture of circumstances and timing and the patient assembly of conditions that needed to reach a particular configuration before the news could surface. That process has been running longer than you have had visibility into it, has been assembling piece by piece in the unhurried way of things that are being built properly, rather than quickly toward the specific moment of completion that produces what is approaching. The completion is here, or close enough to here that the distance between the invisible completion and the visible surfacing of it can be measured in the near rather than the far. And what surfaces when the invisible process completes, what breaks through the ordinary surface of your daily life with the detonation quality I described at the beginning, is going to arrive with the full force of everything that was assembled, not a partial result. The full one, complete, disproportionate, perhaps to anything obvious in the preceding visible circumstances, because most of what built it was invisible. Whew, you have contributed to the building. That is the specific and important thing. Spirit is pressing forward. This news is not arriving for someone who simply waited. It is arriving for someone who was in the invisible and often unacknowledged way of people who do the real work quietly, actively building toward it, through the choices made when no one was watching. Through the standard maintained when lowering, it would have been easier and would have produced no visible consequence. Through the continuing day after day, without the external reward that continuing deserves, but rarely immediately receives, in the direction of what is true and what matters and what the invisible process was always moving toward. The building was yours, and the news that is detonating is the world's way of making that building visible, of returning in the form of something concrete and real and impossible to miss, the specific and proportionate result of everything that was invested. Now I want to speak about what the explosion actually looks like, because Spirit is bringing it through with enough specificity today that I want to honor it rather than leave it as atmospheric. Multiple things. That is the first and most important quality of what is approaching. Not one piece of good news contained within its own domain. Multiple things in different areas, through different channels, arriving in a compressed window of time that makes the whole feel like an explosion rather than a sequence, as though the invisible process was working across several dimensions of your life simultaneously, and the completion across all of them is happening in the same concentrated moment rather than one by one in the orderly, easy to process sequence that a quieter period might have offered. The love dimension. Something is resolving, clarifying, arriving at honesty that the previous ambiguity was preventing in the specific area of your life that has perhaps been carrying the most unresolved. A clarity that was always coming and is now finally close enough to the surface that the surface is about to reflect it. Not the managed, one step at a time clarity of a situation finding its slow resolution. The detonation kind, where something that has been pressing finally breaks through and makes the ambiguity simply impossible to maintain. Soft sigh. The material dimension, something practical, concrete, this affects the actual daily texture of your life, is shifting in the direction of more proportionate to what you have been investing, more reflective of the quality of what you bring to whatever domain your work lives in. More simply, without the complicated middle ground of almost available than the recent circumstances have been suggesting was on offer. The correction toward accuracy that has been assembling in the invisible is breaking through in this dimension too. In the same compressed window, part of the same explosion, and the internal dimension, the one that is always, in the end, the most significant. Something is completing in you. A question that has been open about what you are worth, about what is available to someone who is who you are, about whether the carrying was going to produce anything proportionate to what it cost, is finding its answer. From the outside, through the news that is coming, and from the inside, through the specific quality of someone who has finally, through everything the invisible process required, arrived at the settled understanding that the answer was always going to be yes, always was yes, and is now in the detonation, in the explosion of what was assembled becoming undeniable. Yes, the answer has always been yes. Whew. Now I want to speak about how to receive something that explodes. Because the detonation quality of what is approaching the all at once, multiple dimensions, this replaces the frame nature of it, can produce in the person receiving it a specific and understandable kind of overwhelm. The I cannot process all of this simultaneously quality of someone who has been in a relatively quiet period and finds themselves suddenly in the middle of considerable activity. Do not try to process it all simultaneously. That is the specific and practical instruction. Let each piece land as it lands in its own moment with its own quality of arrival. Do not rush to integrate the full picture before the full picture has finished arriving. Do not require yourself to have a coherent response to everything before everything has been given the space to be what it is. Simply be present for each arrival as it comes in the sequence that the explosion chooses, rather than the sequence that would be most convenient for processing. And do not minimize. That is the other specific instruction directed particularly at those of you whose relationship with good things has been complicated by enough disappointment that the default response to something significant is the immediately protecting yourself from the full size of it minimization that makes the receiving feel safer. The huge news deserves to be received as huge. The explosion deserves to be felt as an explosion, not the managed, appropriately proportioned, let me not get too excited version that self-protection produces. The actual thing at the actual size, as the actual result of everything the invisible process was building. You built this. Receive it at the size it is. Soft sigh. Something is detonating in your life. Soon, in the specific, compressed, multiple things at once quality of an explosion rather than a sequence, built from the invisible work, arriving at the completion point of a process that has been running longer than you have had visibility into. Proportionate, finally, completely in the full size of what was invested, proportionate to everything that was built and carried and maintained through the quiet. Be ready, not with the bracing quality of someone preparing for an impact, with the open, grounded, I am here, completely quality of someone who is present for what arrives at its actual size, in its actual form, with its actual force. The explosion is good. What it detonates into is better than the frame it replaces. And you standing here, built by everything the invisible process required, are exactly the person it was always building toward. If this reading found you today, if something here confirmed that the quiet was never empty and that what it was building is genuinely approaching, stay close, subscribe, and come back. Because the story of what happens when years of invisible work finally detonates into the visible world and what becomes possible from the explosion is one worth witnessing all the way through. And the next reading will be there for every huge, real, completely arrived step of what comes next.